The Vampire of Krakow, the macabre story of Carol Kot. Reconstructing an unprecedented horror. Investigators often use crime scene reconstruction as an essential tool to analyze and understand the perpetrator's way of operating. However, in the case of Carol Kot, this procedure was more than just a police analysis. It was an opportunity for the killer to relive his crimes. In the recordings made by the Polish police during these reconstructions, you can see a calm and even pleased young man, while he explains in detail how he stabbed his victims. These images are as disturbing as they are revealing. They not only show Kot's coldness and cruelty, but also a deeply disturbed mind that enjoyed displaying his work in front of his own captors. This behavior, typical of some killers with psychopathic traits, allowed experts to develop a psychological profile that would help to understand how the sadistic fantasies of a seemingly normal young man resulted in a series of brutal attacks and murders. The first attack, the woman who survived a miracle. On September 21, 1964, in Krakow, Poland, Helena Benson, a 48-year-old woman, was attending a church on Garankarska Street. While she was praying, she noticed a young man in a trench coat who seemed focused on his prayers. Suddenly, she felt a hard hit on her back that knocked her to the ground. Stunned, the woman got up and saw the stranger running away. At first, Helena thought she had only been punched, but a huge blood stain on her dress revealed something much worse. The doctors discovered that she had been stabbed with a knife that, luckily, didn't hit any of her vital organs. Despite the seriousness of the attack, Helena recovered quickly and was able to give a basic description of her attacker: a tall, thin young man wearing a trench coat. The police started an investigation but didn't find any clues. No one could have imagined that this would be just the beginning of a chilling series of crimes. The following attacks and the first murder. Just 2 days later, on September 23, 1964, Francesca Lewandowski, a 78-year-old woman, was attacked while climbing the stairs in her apartment building. The attacker, again described as a young man in a trench coat, stabbed her in the back and ran away before anyone could stop him. Although Francesca survived, the wound damaged her spine, and she was left permanently disabled. Panic began to grip the city when, 6 days later, on September 29th, Maria Plitzia, an 86-year-old woman, was found injured in a local church. She had been stabbed in the back, but this time, the consequences were fatal. Although the wound itself wasn't deadly, the pain and shock caused her to have a heart attack, and she died the next day. The news of Maria's murder shocked Krakow. The authorities issued a statement warning of a possible serial killer, which sparked fear among the population. Many women stopped going out alone, especially at night, and the police increased patrols. However, the killer seemed to have vanished into thin air. An unexpected turn of events. The victims changed. On February 13, 1966, 17 months after Maria Plitsia's murder, a shocking crime shook Krakow. Leszek Kalek, an 11-year-old boy, was found dead at the bottom of a hill. He had been stabbed 11 times, with wounds piercing his heart, lungs, and aorta. This change in victims, from elderly women to children, baffled investigators. Over the next few weeks, there were many sightings of a young man in a trench coat lurking around women and children on quiet streets. People were so scared that many started wearing pot lids or pillows under their clothes to protect themselves from being stabbed. 2 months later, on April 14, 1966, a 7-year-old girl named Malgosia was attacked while going down the stairs in her apartment building to mail a letter. The attacker stabbed her 8 times, leaving her seriously hurt. Thankfully, Malgosia survived, but she had scars that would last a lifetime. These crimes were a turning point in the case. It was now clear that the killer wasn't just attacking for the thrill of it, but took a twisted pleasure in choosing innocent and helpless victims. This is the testimony that changed everything. In the middle of all the uncertainty, Danusha Bodarchek, a 22-year-old student at the Academy of Fine Arts, went to the police with a disturbing story. She said she knew a young man named Carol Kot, who had told her that he went out on the streets to stab women and children. At first, she didn't take his words seriously, but the similarities between the attacks and Kot's confessions convinced her that he wasn't joking. The police started to watch Kot secretly. For 3 months, they followed his every move. They saw that he seemed like a normal young man. He went to school, He was part of a shooting club, and he lived with his parents. However, the investigators had a plan. They waited until he finished his final exams to arrest him. This way, if he went to trial, he couldn't say he wasn't thinking clearly because he had just finished his studies. The capture of the Vampire of Krakow. On July 1st, 1966, Carol Cot was arrested at his home. Agents found a collection of knives, daggers, and bayonets in his room, as well as a human anatomy atlas where he had marked the vital points of the human body with a pencil. During the interrogation, the first two surviving victims identified him without hesitation. Francesca Lewandowski, upon seeing him, screamed that he was the man who had attacked her. Kot's reaction was mocking. "You have a good memory. Come here so I can finish you off," he said with a smile on his face. Far from showing remorse, Kot confessed to the crimes with chilling details, even showing enthusiasm when describing how he licked the blood off his knives after each attack. He also admitted to trying to poison people in restaurants and bars, although those attempts were not successful. The origin of a monster. Carol Kot was born on December 18, 1946, to a respectable family in Krakow. His father was an engineer, and his mother was a homemaker. However, from a very young age, he showed alarming behaviors. According to his own testimony, the birth of his younger sister made him feel displaced. This unleashed a deep frustration in him that he channeled into torturing animals. One of the most significant events in his childhood occurred when he was 10 years old and visited a slaughterhouse in a rural town. Fascinated by the blood and the slaughter of the animals, he began to develop a fetish that combined violence and pleasure. This interest evolved into sadistic fantasies that involved not only animals but also human beings. At 17, Kot decided to take the leap and become a murderer. His first victim was Helena Benson, whom he stabbed in a church. According to him, he licked the blood from his knife after the attack. He experienced an excitement that he described as the best feeling of his life. The vampire and his need to kill. During the interrogations after his arrest, Carol Kot made it clear that he had no remorse. On the contrary, he was eager to share the most gruesome details of his crimes. He explained that, from a young age, he had experienced an indescribable pleasure in seeing blood, and that the stabbings made him feel powerful. Kot confessed that the murder of Maria Plicia was one of the most gratifying moments of his life. He recounted that after stabbing her in the church, he followed the newspaper reports about her condition. When he read that the woman had died, he felt a mix of satisfaction and pride. He also admitted that his interest in children as victims did not have a sexual component, but that he simply considered them easier and more accessible targets. For him, women and children were ideal prey because, in his words, they were weak, vulnerable, and unable to defend themselves. The crime reconstruction. At the investigators' request, Kot agreed to reenact his attacks. These sessions, which were videotaped, are a chilling testament to his behavior. In the footage, you can see the young man detailing precisely how he approached his victims, how he stabbed them, and then ran away. At one particular moment, while reenacting the attack on the 7-year-old girl, Kot smiled and remarked, "See this angle? It's perfect for reaching the heart." The officers who participated in these reconstructions were shocked by the young man's coldness and his obvious satisfaction in recalling his crimes. The trial of the Vampire of Krakow. Carol Kot's trial began on May 3, 1967. It caught the attention of all of Poland. The newspapers called him the Vampire of Krakow, a nickname Kot wore with pride. He even told reporters he was flattered to be compared to such a scary monster. Kot was on trial for 2 murders, Maria Plicia and Leszek Kalek, 10 attempted murders, including Helena Benson, Francesca Lewandowski, and a 7-year-old girl named Malgosia, and 4 counts of arson. While no one died in the fires, they showed his desire to kill many people. During the trial, his lawyer tried to argue that Kot was not in his right mind, but the prosecutor showed evidence that Kot knew exactly what he was doing. They pointed to the final exams he had recently passed. This proved he could plan and carry out difficult tasks and tell the difference between right and wrong. The killer's profile. Several psychiatrists examined Carol Kot, but they couldn't agree on everything. Some doctors thought he was a psychopath who enjoyed hurting others, while others thought he was very mentally ill. Kot said some really scary things in his interviews, like, "Suffering is beautiful. Hurting someone is like making art. Not everyone can do it. I love blood. Killing is the only thing that makes me feel alive. Stabbing someone is worth dying for. I don't regret anything." Even though he said all that, the experts decided Kot wasn't crazy. They said he was a killer who knew exactly what he was doing, which meant he was responsible for his crimes. The sentence and execution. On July 14, 1967, the court found Carol Kot guilty of all charges and sentenced him to death. During the reading of the verdict, Kot remained indifferent, even smiling at times. The defense appealed the sentence, arguing that Kot was only 17 years old when he committed his first murder, and that his history of mental illness should be considered. In January 1968, the lawyers succeeded in having the sentence commuted to life in prison. However, just 2 months later, the Polish Supreme Court reviewed the case and decided to reinstate the death penalty, taking into account the seriousness of his crimes and their impact on society. Karol Kot was executed on May 16, 1968. His last words, according to witnesses, were, "I hope the blood I spilled will make me immortal." A killer driven by a brain tumor? After his execution, rumors spread that Karol Kot might have suffered from a brain tumor that affected his behavior. According to some sources, during an alleged autopsy, a large tumor was found in his brain, which would explain his violent impulses and erratic behavior. However, later investigations have questioned this claim. In the book, The Brain of the Murderer, by Polish journalist Przemysław Semczuk, it is stated that autopsies were not performed on those sentenced to death in Poland at that time. Therefore, the existence of the tumor remains an unverified mystery. A figure that inspires both horror and curiosity. Over the years, the figure of Karol Kot has been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and psychological studies. His ability to deceive adults and hide his true nature behind the facade of a polite and quiet young man remains one of the most baffling aspects of his case. Moreover, his behavior during interviews and his trial, where he seemed to take pride in his crimes, places him alongside other famous serial killers who use their crimes as a way to gain notoriety. Final thoughts. Karol Kot's case leaves us with a disturbing question. Are killers born, or do circumstances make them? Although there's no easy answer, her story reminds us to be aware of the signs of violent behavior, especially in young people. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and share it on your social media. It really helps me keep making this kind of content, where we explore mysteries, strange characters, and curiosities from history.